What's up, fellow Titan Quest fans? Welcome to the Titan Quest 2 damage guide. How damage really works, full breakdown. In this video I'll give you a detailed breakdown of how damage is actually dealt in Titan Quest 2. We'll go over all the damage types, the right masteries and skills to scale them, how attributes and gear affect your damage output, and of course how to build your character to deal massive damage no matter what build you start. There are four main sources of damage in Titan Quest 2: weapon attacks, abilities, ailments and damage over time. Each of those follows slightly different scaling rules, and we'll go through all of them step by step. If you want to skip the more in-depth stuff about damage mechanics, you can use the timestamps to jump to the damage priorities, but I highly recommend you look into each topic that I cover in order to understand how damage works in this game. Feel free to jump around with the timestamps and come back later to this video, because the whole thing is a lot to take in. With that out of the way, we can get right into it. And right off the bat, we are starting with a little light math. It's nothing to be afraid of though. Damage is being calculated roughly with this formula. Damage dealt equals to base damage times base factor times, in parentheses, 1 plus item scalar times 1 plus ability scalar. Let's look at each variable of the formula, but first don't be confused by the, in parentheses, 1 plus item scalars. That means, for example, you have plus 80% for the damage type on your items. The calculation looks like this: 1 plus 0.8 for the item scalar. Use that if a modifier is additive. The first part is the base damage. This is the damage that we deal either by an ability or through weapon attacks. This gets multiplied by the base factor. Your character has a base factor for each damage type. You can look it up in the offensive stats. A base factor is determined by how you allocate your attribute points. Your primary attributes are what you spend these stat points on: might, agility, knowledge and vigor. And they influence your secondary attributes, which are what actually scales your damage. Fitness scales pierce and strike damage, cunning scales lightning and poison damage, resolve scales fire and cold damage. And vitality, energy drain and spirit damage get scaled by the highest secondary attribute that you have. Your secondary attributes determine how strong your base factor is, and the base factor applies to almost every kind of damage that you deal. The base factor is calculated like this: base factor equals to 1 plus 0.002 times secondary attribute. So if your secondary attribute is 400, your base factor is 1.8, meaning you deal 80% more damage right off the bat. Notice how 400 attribute points scale your damage only for plus 80%. There are passive skills where a single passive ability scales your damage type for plus 80%, and that's just one ability. But more on the priorities for damage scaling later. We got an idea now on how your base factor for each damage type is put together. The next part of our formula are item scalars and ability scalars. These are basically your damage multipliers coming from gear and skills. Weapons can roll stats like plus 50% fire damage, plus 40% physical damage, or plus 25% weapon damage. These are direct multiplicative scalars in your damage formula. Abilities also contribute, both active and passive ones. Active auras like Storm Nimbus boost your lightning or cold damage by a percentage. Or there are also temporary skills like Valor that boost the damage for a brief period. Notice how a Valor activation increases the damage numbers drastically. Passive skills grant permanent scaling, such as plus % projectile damage or plus % poison damage.
Now that's a lot of damage!
In our formula, we combine item scalars and ability scalars to this. Alright, this part here, the 1 plus sum of all percent scalars, simply means that all your bonuses from gear, skills and buffs add up together and then multiply your total damage. Let's say your bow has plus 50% fire damage, your aura adds plus 30% fire, and your passive adds plus 20%. You add them up. 50 plus 30 plus 20 equals to 100%. Then we take 1 plus 1.0 equals to 2, meaning your fire damage is doubled. Take note that this calculation happens for every damage type that you deal. If that's already too complicated, I have bad news for you. This is just a simplified version. We haven't included crits, resistances and other factors yet. But bear with me, we'll go over everything step by step. It won't get too complicated. Before we move on, let's talk about the base damage first. If your build deals damage mostly through abilities, your base damage is that what the ability says at the damage description, and that's that. It can't be increased only by leveling up your ability. When your build deals damage through weapon attacks or abilities that are modified towards dealing weapon damage, then that's a different story. You can make use of flat damage. Sounds stupid, but it's ultra powerful. It is of utmost importance that your weapon damage has a flat number on it, if you want to climb the higher damage numbers. Flat damages can also roll on your rings and sometimes on other epic or unique gear. Your weapon damage combined with all the flat damages build your damages foundation, because they add up in the base damage in our formula. This number gets multiplied, and the higher your base damage is, the higher the end result. If we are talking about flat damages, we must also go into damage conversions. It is pretty easy to tweak your build into doing exactly what you desire in Titan Quest II. There are many possibilities to convert your damage. You find most of them in the primary attack modifiers. For instance, Fire Explosions has 100% damage converted to fire damage. This converts all your weapon base damage and all other flat bonuses too. That means you can equip rings that give plus 20 poison damage, and this also will be converted to fire damage. The conversion does not work for other primary attack modifiers like fragmentation that give a chance on hit to deal pierce damage. This one stays pierce damage regardless. You often find conversion modifiers in your aura abilities. The conversion obviously only works when the aura is active. These aura conversions also apply to all attack-tagged skills or skills using percent weapon damage. The modifiers also say 100% damage converted to X damage. But what if we activate multiple damage conversions? If we activate 2 of those for 2 different damage types, the conversion will be split 50-50. If you activate 3 conversions, the damage will be split by 33% for each respective damage type. Keep this splitting in mind when we come to the ailment part later. It'll be really relevant there. Only your flat damages get converted. If your weapon has the blazing prefix that gives plus 50% fire damage, then this is not influenced by the conversion. This means 2 things. Prioritize the highest flat damage possible, regardless of it being the type that you need. And make sure your weapon's percent scalar matches your target damage type. You obviously go for the highest percent scalar on gear for your desired damage type. The damage conversion from primary attack modifiers overrides the conversion granted from auras. If we look at the primary attack modifiers, it says damage converted, and at the auras, like Earth Enchantment, it says weapon damage. That means that the aura conversions do convert only the weapon base damage and not the flat damage bonuses on the weapon or on other gear. Only the damage conversion of the primary attack modifier converts both weapon damage and flat damage bonuses. Keep that in mind when you convert your damage. The damage conversions become especially important when you are on an ailment build, because you often want to run multiple ailment types, and Hence, you split your damage conversion as explained earlier. You find many crit chance or ailment bonuses on your gear and abilities. It begs the question, what is better? Or should you take one or the other, if not both? In short, in my opinion, you should always prioritize critical hit chance in both passives and items, regardless of your build dealing damage through weapons or abilities. It is simple. What do you think is better? Dealing a 50,000 crit or 3 ailment ticks for 700 damage, dealing around 2k damage in total? Crits come in all numbers. My builds deal from 7.5k every hit to 10k. Then there are some builds that have big strikes with 50k, 100k and some even 250k. All the while, ailment damage remains laughably low. The kill speed for mobs is not that great and bosses take forever with an ailment build, even if you got all the possible bonuses from gear and abilities, especially rogue mastery. If you want to create a gimmicky ailment build, go for it, but if your aim is to deal the most damage as possible, in other words, go with the game's mechanics, you want to prioritize critical hits. It's a shame that there is so much in loot and abilities to increase your ailment stuff, but in reality it does very little. Ailments seem like a beginner's trap in Dragon Quest 2. You go into that because it seems cool, but in the end your build lacks kill speed. Opposed to that, critical hits are where things get really crazy. Crits work with both weapons and caster builds. They are also not exclusive to rogue mastery. Although rogue just has strong passive crit scalers, so it's more efficient there, and you can climb the 6-figure damage number crits. Crits multiply your damage after all the modifiers. If you are on a weapon build, make sure that your weapon has the inherent stat base crit chance. This is extremely important and of the highest priority for these sort of builds. This also works if you have abilities to deal weapon damage. You come across many items with a % crit chance bonus. It rolls on weapons, shoulders and rings, sometimes also on other gear if it's epic or legendary. Each attack or damage dealing ability has a chance to deal a critical hit. This chance gets increased by modifiers from gear or abilities. A critical hit deals 200% damage, so the damage is doubled by default. You can increase the crit damage multiplier with abilities and possibly with gear to increase that number of 200. If your crit chance exceeds 100%, you also have the chance to super crit. Unlike a crit that is indicated by an orange number, a super crit is red and deals 3 times the normal damage by default. In reality, you need around 170% crit chance to reliably have super crits. If we put that into a formula, it would look like something like this. By default, a normal hit has a multiplier of 1, a crit has 2, and a super crit has 3. Again, this multiplier number can be increased by other effects. We can expand our damage formula with crits now. And finally, if it's a critical hit, the entire result gets multiplied again by the crit multiplier. We deducted that crits out-damage ailments by a huge margin, but still, ailments are super interesting. I like that they took apart the old damage over time system known from so many games, and made it into something really special. Each damage type has an ailment type, and every attack, be it weapon or ability attacks, has an ailment chance. Ailments are basically damage over time debuffs that stack, and they also have a unique effect. This is what makes ailments so interesting. Here's a quick overview on which damage type results in which kind of ailment. The energy drain damage type has the weaken ailment, but at the time of this video it hasn't been decided what the ailment type and special effect is. Also, vitality damage is said to apply the staggered ailment, but it is not listed in the game's mechanic info, so maybe that is about to change as well. The chance for applying the ailment is determined by the ailment chance. You can increase that by gear bonuses or abilities. That increases the global ailment chance, meaning the chance of you applying ailments with weapon attacks or ability attacks. The base ailment chance of your weapon can be increased as well with modifiers of your primary attack or with weapons that have the inherent stat of increasing the base ailment chance. Your hit damage increases the ailment chance as well, but for simplicity reasons it is not included in the formula. The victim's resistances towards the ailment type determines whether the ailment is being applied. For example, if your bleeding resistance is 60%, your probability of not getting the bleeding ailment are 60%. Quoting the game's mechanics info, if an ailment is applied and the creature doesn't resist, the ailment takes effect. The higher the damage you deal, the higher the chance of the ailment being applied. Should ailment chance be above 100%, an additional roll happens that checks whether the resistances stop the ailments from happening, and a second stack of ailments is applied, and so on. By default, the cap for ailment stacks is 10 for each ailment type. You can increase the cap with mostly passive abilities and with some unique gear. The cap limit can never exceed 20, and that goes for each ailment type. So you can theoretically cast multiple ailment types with 20 stacks on the enemy. Each ailment has a different effect once applied. The strength of this effect is defined by the amount of stacks on the target. Ailment effects are often unlocked by passive abilities. Let's go over the ailments and their special effects one by one, starting with the worst of them all possibly, Staggered. Caused by strike damage and reduces the move and attack speed. Notice how it doesn't say damage over time. This ailment type sucks because it doesn't deal damage and only slows. To make things worse, also vitality damage applies this stupid ailment type. Staggered can cause the enemy to be stunned or in the game's terms be impaired if you stack enough staggered stacks. Next up is probably one of the best types, Bleeding. It is caused by pierce damage. Pierce damage can be scaled very well, but Rogue Mastery also has a good passive that enables Rupture. This effect has a chance per ailment stack to be applied and deals a huge portion of damage. Maybe with that one, ailments can be viable to some degree. Too bad Rupture only deals reduced damage to bosses though. Fire damage causes the ailment type Burning. This one just deals damage over time. Earth Mastery has a very strong passive ability called Combustion that gives each enemy that's burning and dying a chance to explode. Think of this as the special effect Burning has. Next up is Chilled. This one's obviously caused by cold damage, and this ailment deals only half of the damage compared to other ailment types, because it slows enemies. With maximum stacks, enemies and even bosses can be slowed to such a degree that they almost don't move. It is still better to kill them outright instead of slowing them and needing multiple minutes to drop a boss. Chill has another cute effect hidden in the Storm Mastery. In later stages, you can unlock a chance that gives Chill the possibility to freeze your target. This freeze only works for non-boss enemies. Everything up to enemy commanders, including them, can be frozen. Plagued is a good ailment type, especially for rogue-based characters. Plagued is caused by poison damage and just deals some damage over time. No special effect here. There is, however, a primary attack modifier called Toxicity that A. converts all your damage to poison damage and B. applies another separate damage over time. This additional damage over time modifier does not exist for other damage types. Shocked is a very interesting one. Lightning damage causes it, and it gives a chance to disrupt enemies. This disruption is only relevant when the enemies are channeling up abilities, because disrupting that stops the channeling. As explained earlier, the ailment resistance just reduces the chance of the ailment being applied. It does not reduce the damage as the other resistances do. The ailment damage is dealt as so-called true damage, which bypasses resistances. This sounds good on paper because ailments have a bunch of effects and mastery unlocks, deal true damage and so on. But the damage is not there at the point of this video. The resistances you have are mostly the same as the resistances for ailments. Fire resistance is the same as burning resistance, same goes for chilled, shocked and plagued. Bleeding, however, does not have that, because you only have pierce armor on your armor pieces. The same goes for staggered, but staggered doesn't deal damage and only slows, so it's a different story. Vitality damage also applies staggered, but vitality resistance does not equal your staggered resistance. Spirit damage does not seem to have an ailment type, and the niche energy drain damage has no resistances, hence the ailment for it, weakened, can only be resisted against if you find the gear that explicitly says plus X% of weakened resistance. The ailment formula looks like this. Each ailment lasts about 3 seconds and usually ticks 3 times. In the ailment damage per tick formula, we multiply by the number of stacks in the end. This is a simplification because this assumes that all stacks are identical. They aren't, in fact, because damage fluctuates. Stacks are additive. Each stack contributes its per tick amount. There are many items and abilities that improve your ailment performance. +% ailment chance, +% ailment power, +% ailment duration, +X to maximum ailment stacks, and also +% damage over time. The tutorial says that all damaging ailment types are also damage over time. That means that the erosive prefix on weapons and jewelry that gives a percentile increase to damage over time boosts our ailment damage directly. It also increases our other damage over time effects. There are some in the game, like the toxicity modifier of primary attack that deals poison damage over time, ignite that deals fire damage over time, and also that freeze curse spell of storm mastery. These niche damage effects get boosted by the damage over time too. Let's talk about resistances, because when dealing damage, they reduce the damage of the respective type. A 60% fire resistance reduces the fire damage final amount by 60%. The resistance caps out at 60%, but you can increase the cap with effects like passive abilities and gear. There are some niche damage types like vitality or spirit damage, and their resistances are harder to come by. More on that topic in another resistances video. I cover the topic here briefly without going into formulas. What is important for dealing damage is that there is no resistance for strike and pierce damage, only the armor values. For most armor pieces, the armor value is split between strike and pierce armor, and they reduce the damage amount of those types. We don't want to talk about defense here. There's an old German proverb that says, attack is the best form of defense. So we only care about how we can reduce the enemy's resistances in order to maximize our damage. Don't underestimate the resistance reduction, because this increases your overall damage by a lot. To be more specific, it increases your damage for the exact amount that you reduce the resistances by. There are numerous effects to reduce resistances, modifiers or abilities or weapon effects. There are inherent stats on weapons that say -X% reduced resistances for 3 seconds on hit. Take note that resistance reduction stacks, so you can combine multiple sources if you are in the time frame of the first reduction. You also come by another weapon inherent stat that says +X% weapon defense penetration. This one does not debuff the enemy for 3 seconds, but ignores the enemy's resistances on the first hit. In order to create a build that claps the monsters well, you want to have at least one effect that reduces resistances, if you want to max out the damage you deal. Damage priorities is an important topic. It helps greatly to have an idea on what you want to do with your character beforehand. Plan out your build. You do that by going over the abilities of the masteries in question and theory crafting what the core ability could be. What is the main damage type that we want to deal? Should the build be a fighter or a caster build? Maybe even a hybrid? Will the build focus on hitting hard with critical hits or whittling down the monsters with ailments? For a fully fledged ailment build, you want to get into rogue mastery because of the actives and passives that give ailment bonuses. A fire damage build basically needs earth mastery because of the passive damage scalars. A cold damage build needs storm mastery and so on. The importance of those passive damage scalars cannot be underestimated. You basically deal huge amounts of damage by having a high base damage, high percentile scalars with items and abilities, and also a good crit chance that multiplies all of that another time. Attribute points don't play a huge part in that damage scaling. Attribute points on gear are a trap, and they are not worth it. The only one that is good is Vigor, because of the increased life and secondary resistances. Don't go for the other attribute points for your gear. Most equipment pieces, helmet, chest, shoulders, arms, both rings, amulet and your weapons, can roll flat attribute bonuses. That's 8 possible slots, or 9 if you dual wield. Let's say we have 8 pieces, all with plus 15 might. That's a total of plus 120 might. Using our earlier base factor formula, if you add plus 120 points, that only increases your base factor by 0.24, so a 24% boost. A laughable increase considering that you wasted 8 affixes for a 24% damage increase. See now that it's a beginner's trap? There must be bad things to make the other things good. So what is good? The most important affix is your weapon's prefix that gives a percentile increase to your desired damage type. For instance, we are on a build that focuses on fire damage. Then the prefix blazing can easily give you a plus 55% fire damage boost. Pair that with a suffix of temperature that also gives a percentile increase to fire damage and that rolls on weapons, arms, rings and necklaces. This is insanely better and higher up on the priority list than attribute bonuses. Don't listen to anyone giving you that advice, unless it's only Vigor that they are talking about. We learned that attribute points don't play a significant part in our damage, relative to base damage and scalars. Should you jam attributes in one type and leave some in Vigor? It really depends on what you want to do with your build and what items you want to use. Staves and caster armor needs knowledge. Weapons have specific attribute requirements. For example, a heavy two-handed weapon needs might. Some weapons require a minimum number in a secondary attribute, and some items have player level requirement. This is why it's important to plan your build ahead. If you don't have an idea on where to take your build, why not get some inspiration on a build guide, preferably one of my own build guides. You can always reset the attributes and skill point allocation at the altar if you use some gold. This is an awesome way to recycle failed builds or fine-tune builds. Another huge priority of your build should be flat damages, but only if you are on a build that attacks with the weapon or uses skills that deal weapon damage. The flat damage can roll on weapons, rings, and other unique gear. If your weapon has already some nice base damage on it, it also needs flat damage bonuses, as high and as many as possible. This all goes towards your base damage, and that number gets multiplied by the scalars. You want to maximize both of those variables, so you need as much flat damage as possible. Take note that when you are on a weapon build, it doesn't matter what flat damage type you have on your gear. You can use weapon conversions from a primary attack modifier, and those convert both your weapon base damage and all flat damage bonuses, opposed to damage conversion from auras like Storm Nimbus or Earth Enchantment that do not convert flat damage bonuses. I can't stress enough how important crits are. Dealing double damage most of the time is very powerful, sometimes even triple the damage in form of super crits. If you want to reach the highest damage numbers, you need some melee abilities or abilities that consume a lot of energy. So here's the recipe for maximizing your damage. Plan what you want your build to do. Get your base damage as high as possible, use the right scalars for gear and abilities, go for crits, use temporary damage buffs, and also the resistance reduction. If you do all that, there's nothing standing in the way in Title Quest 2. Phew, that was a long one. If you made it to the end, comment, "That's a lot of damage," down below.
That's a lot of damage!
So I know you stuck with me all the way to the bitter end. It is bittersweet though, because although this video has come to an end, I'm already working on the next video, so I look forward to seeing you there.